recording, first of all. All right, if you haven't, and it looks like you haven't yet, use the chat, please, to sign in by way of taking roll. Okay. We're going to do a couple of things, unless otherwise interrupted. We're going to do a couple of things in class today. One of the things we're going to do to start is we're going to look at the document that I sent you on, sorry, I'm doing several things at once here. The document that I sent you on the excerpts of your writing. So we'll start with that. Oh, there's Kyle rolling in late, so we'll get him in here. If you look on the Moodle page, I did email it. I sent it out in a group email. Did anybody get that I sent out? You should have a copy of that. I hope you had a chance to look at it. Let's look at that. Sorry, this is my system, as usual, is going really slowly today. All right. And let me make it a little bigger. I don't know if I'm actually going to share my screen. I will if we feel like it's necessary, but I thought we would go through those examples. And what I did was I just went into each person's submission, and there were 10, there were 10 people formally enrolled in the class. And I just pulled out usually something that was hovering around what should have been a thesis statement. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about what I mean by a thesis statement as we go through this. What you're generally doing in an essay that's very, very brief like this and very concise is that you're trying to capture for the reader in as few words as possible, as concisely as possible, what you're going to tell them, not just what you're going to talk about, but what you're actually going to tell them. You're telling them in a sense, here's what I want you to learn, okay? And so when you're writing, the introductory paragraph for a brief essay like this, by the last sentence of that first paragraph, the reader should know what your conclusions are going to be, not just what you're going to look at, but what conclusions you're going to draw. That was almost uniformly ignored, okay? But that happens. I'm not worried about it. But it is one of those things where when I'm grading, about 20% of your grade is the clarity of your thesis, okay? How clear were you, roughly by the end of the first paragraph of your essay, on what I was going to learn when I read this? Not what were you going to talk about, but what conclusions, if any, were you able to draw? Okay. The reason why that's important, it's not just a question of form. It's the idea that you're demonstrating a kind of what I often refer to as functional mastery of the material. And you're saying, okay, I didn't just read these things. I understand what they're trying to tell me. And I've got these two readings, and either I can show how in some ways they're both telling me the same thing, and here's why it's important, or I can tell you why they're telling me different things, and here's why that's important. And occasionally I can tell you why that they're telling me contradictory things, and here's why that's important. Okay? Any questions so far? Everybody's very quiet. You all look very grim. Okay. All right. Let's. Does everybody have that in front of you in some form or another? Can you see those? As long as you can see them, then there's no reason really for me to do a screen share. All right. Now the first one there. Okay. Notice what we've got here. Read that here. This idea is a reason long-standing democracies such as the US and the UK still exist as democracies, comma, there were no large-scale political activist groups, comma, and most people studied where, I think means were, apathetic to government, comma, but still they had been integrated into democratic systems, comma, and had grown up in them. That needs some work. It needs some work on two levels. One, it needs some work in terms of grammar and syntax, mostly syntax, sentence structure. But also, there are some things in there, some statements that are made that are not factually representative of what the sources say. Okay, so give me some suggestions. How would you fix that? What would I want to fix?
I think that using the word democracies a lot could be changed and making it more clear and concise in a smaller, shorter scale. So
Okay,
like
how
all
can,
the information they included could be a lot simpler
okay,
put.
all right.
Um,
How could you do that? What would you need to do?
let's see.
Split the sentence up.
Mhm.
Split it
The
into
sentence is
multiple
split
parts.
up. It's split up by commas.
It's split up by commas, so it's a run-on sentence. It needs to be split up as separate ideas.
Right. So the first thing you have is if you look at the phrase, the US and the UK exist as democracies, comma, there were no large scale. That's what's called a comma splice. Okay. Now that should be a period. Okay. And then a capital T in there were no large scale political activist groups. And then you could say comma, and most people studied were apathetic to government, comma. Right. That should probably be a period. And then you could say still they had been integrated into democratic systems, comma, and had grown up in them. Okay, so the first thing is this is a common mistake in undergraduate writing is this notion of a comma splice. That is, you're using a comma where you need to end the sentence. You finish a thought, okay? This idea is a reason is kind of awkward. I don't know why you couldn't just say this is why long-standing democracies, such as the US and the UK, still exist as democracies. Okay. So part of it is it's just simply overwritten. This idea is a reason long-standing democracies, blah, 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 could be this is why. Or the authors suggest that this is why. Okay. Then there's the problem of factual accuracy. None of the authors suggest that there were no large-scale political activist groups in either the UK or the United States. That's not factually correct. Okay, so you see what I look for when I look at your thesis, and I guarantee you, by the time I get to the end of the first paragraph of your writing, I already know what your grade's going to be, and I'm almost never, well, I don't want to say disappointed, but I almost never like, boy, I didn't see they were going there. You can tell, after you've read, whatever, several thousand of these over the course of years. It isn't really that hard to figure out what's going on. Okay. And so we have a combination here of someone who's clearly giving me a first draft. It's hard for me to imagine that someone would have written a sentence like this, which structurally, obviously, we can struggle with that. I had to kind of back up and start a couple of times to make sure I understood what was trying to be said here. Now, that happens on a first draft, okay? It should never happen with work that you submit for evaluation, okay? Never. And then there is the question of whether or not you're being factually accurate. No one writing at the time that Allman and Powell wrote Civic Culture would have argued that there were no large-scale political activist groups in the United States. There were labor unions, there were civil rights activists, there were all kinds of public interest groups. In fact, the predominant theory in the United States at that time was group theory. The idea that politics is ordered and driven by organized interests, by groups, okay? And a careful, even a cursory reading of those materials probably would have informed that. So this makes me concerned that somebody might not have read the piece very carefully. Okay. All right. Any other questions, observations on that first one? We don't necessarily have to do all this, but I want to do a few of them. I want to take some time with this. Okay. Shall we go on to the second one? Yes, no, maybe? Okay. Understanding the specific institutions in countries and regions and how it affects the way their political system works is incredibly important. There is a problem with that sentence. What is it?
It's fluff that you don't like. It's fluff. It's not important to your actual.
Well, I'm not sure that it's fluff and unimportant. There is a structural problem, a problem of grammar and syntax. Okay. In other words, you're referring to an understanding of the specific institutions in countries and regions and how it affects and what affects, how the understanding of that does, or how the specific institutions affect. If it's the specific institutions, it's how they affect the way their political system works. Okay, but if it's the understanding of it that's important, then that sentence is completely unclear. So reading that the first time, I found myself wondering, which is it going to be? Okay, so I go to the next sentence. This, but we don't know what this is, allows us to better understand how our own and other countries may also interact with each other. Does it? Does this explain interaction? Is the purpose of comparative politics to explain how countries interact one with another? Or is that international relations? Okay, that's international relations. So far, okay, I don't want to say that it's fluff. I'm not quite as cynical as as Professor Peterson, but I'm looking for substance here. I'm looking for an indication that these articles have been read and are understood in terms of the key points they're trying to teach us. Okay, they're not trying to teach us about how countries interact. Okay, they are trying to teach us to some extent about the importance of institutions. Okay, but they're also looking at process, structural functionalism. How do these institutions function? Okay, it's not just institutions, it's how they function. Okay. Authors Scott London and John Scott give many different examples of how to approach comparative politics. Now, are there any conclusions drawn in that paragraph? Not really. It's just kind of a flyover. In other words, this is an example of someone telling us, here's kind of what I'm going to talk about, but I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to say. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about. There's no thesis there. There's no indication to help the reader understand, okay, this is what you're going to learn. And so what we would want there is, I like the idea that the writer points out, institutions. And it's not even specific institutions. It's the environment within which institutions function. So what they did get right is, yeah, we got to think about institutions, but it doesn't tell us how or why we should do that. It doesn't tell us that according to structural functionalism, okay, the way that we can evaluate and understand a system is by looking at the way its institutions function. Okay, how well they function and what they produce when they function. What do they do? How do they do it? And how effectively do they do it? Okay, but that's not clear from this. Okay. Now, other than that, grammatically, it's more or less okay. It still reads like a first draft, but it's not bad. It's just that it's so vague that I'm not really sure what I'm going to learn. Now, for me, evaluating that as the instructor, I'm not really sure what you learned. Okay. And I have to think about that because the purpose of these essays is for you to show me, hey, Bill, here's what I've learned. Tell me if I'm missing anything. Tell me if I've got this right. But here, I can't tell because there isn't enough that's specific. Now, again, we're only looking at a paragraph, but that's okay. All right, third one. In the reading Structural Functionalism Overview, written by Scott London, he writes about the ideas of Gabriel Ullmann, who was a political scientist and one of the first to study comparative politics. No, one of the first to study comparative politics was Aristotle, at least 2,000 years before Gabriel Ullmann. Okay, comparative politics is one of the oldest disciplines on the planet. It's older than science. Okay, so that's not accurate. But look at this idea. In the reading Structural Functionalism Overview, written by Scott London, he writes, if I wanted to make that clearer, what would I change? What could I do? Come on, help me out.
I would get rid of he writes and just say in the reading Structural Functionalism Overview by Scott London, the ideas of Gabriel Ullmann, blah, 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 blah.
Right. There's an easier way to do this. Again, this is a short essay. You say London, date of publication, And he doesn't write about, he discusses. Okay, he explains, he summarizes. Help us understand. There are a lot of different ways to write. We want to know which of those ways best describes what London did. Okay, but it doesn't tell us anything about what those ideas are. And it doesn't tell us what structural functionalism is. And it doesn't tell us, more importantly, what the assignment required that you tell me. How is this useful in comparing politics? Okay, now again, I'm taking sentences, but the reason why I picked what I picked was by the time I'd read through each of these drafts, I thought, you know what, this is never really satisfactorily resolved in the entire paper. Okay, so in this one, you've got to give me something more specific than this. It's not about the ideas of Gabriel Almond. There was a whole wing of comparative politics that shared these ideas. Okay, it's more than just Gabriel Almond. All right, so it's not a cult of personality. It's a school of thought, which means several scholars. I mean, I was taught comparative politics, among other things. I was taught by a cohort of professors who were structural functionalists. There were some who were Marxist developmental scholars. There were others who were state theorists. We'll get to that in this upcoming module. Okay, so there were schools of thought. Okay, let's go on to the next one. There are multiple methods of comparing political systems around the world, comma, the purpose. Boom, give me a period, please. Whenever you have a self-contained statement where you have, verb, noun, verb, action, whatever, put a period after it, please. And then say, the purpose of this, the purpose of what? There are multiple methods of comparing political systems around the world, comma, the purpose of this. When you use words like it and this, you're being ambivalent. You're not being specific enough in your writing. Is it the purpose of comparing political systems or the purpose of developing multiple ways of doing it? Those differences matter. They're important. Okay. And so when you're writing, you need to think about that. What am I really trying to explain to the reader? Okay. We'll never know. So there's a comma splice, but also understand how political systems are alike and how differ and how they differ. There again, you see why I know that's a first draft. Nobody reading through that would have left that way. Your mind's going to bounce off of that. So here again, what happens is, and I know that this was done because some of you emailed me on Sunday evening to ask me a question. What that means is you blew the assignment off until Sunday evening. I did caution you about the problems associated with doing that. You weren't leaving yourself enough time to let the thing sit, go back and look at it with fresh eyes and give me a second draft. Okay, that was the most common difficulty with all the issues, was that they were unfinished. They felt like cookies that were undercooked, right? Structural functionalism and rational choice theory are both used. Well, if you mention two of them, I imagine that they're both used. Okay, to explain how various political systems function. How is rational choice theory used to explain how political systems function? We know that structural functionalism is, and it's sort of just to describe it, but also explain it. But how does rational choice theory do that? And then we have a comma splice. They are also methods used to compare political systems. Okay, the problem we have here is we have really 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences. And by the time I've read all 4 of those, I haven't learned anything. I don't know what the difference is between structural functionalism and rational choice theory. And yes, they're different. I don't know anything about the importance of analyzing institutions on the basis of how they function within a system, thereby explaining the system, the larger system. I don't understand how that contrasts significantly with rational choice, which focuses not on institutions, but more specifically on individual decision-making, okay? So they don't necessarily explain how political systems function in the same way. So there again, it's factually inaccurate, okay? And again, I looked at this thinking, uh-oh, this is going to be a tough one. I looked through the entire essay, and indeed, there was a lot of lack of clarity as to what the real distinctions were between structural functionalism and rational choice theory. Okay? Any questions so far? All right, let's do another one. Now this obviously, I think this might have been a continuation of the one above it. I can't remember now though, because I kind of mixed them up. As a result, these methods have provided both contradictory and supportive data. Contradictory of what? And supportive of what? That have ultimately resulted in the fabrication of a better understanding. Mostly when you use the word fabrication, it implies that it's fake. If you're implying that something has evolved or developed or something like that, you're more or less saying, well, you know, at the time at least, this was taken as accurate. But when you say fabrication, you're normally talking about something that is fraudulent. Okay. But we don't know how. We don't know what these methods are provide, what the data are contradictory or supportive of what. Okay. We don't know what the better understanding is. And again, this is a lot of writing that essentially says nothing. You know, with respect to the assignment, okay? It feels like someone trying to fill up space in an essay who isn't quite sure what he or she is writing about, okay? Specifically, writings like On Structural Functionalism and Rational Choice Theory provide a simplified version. How are they simplified? Most people would not argue that structural functionalism simplified things. One of the critiques of structural functionalism, as well as one of the critiques of rational choice theory, is they kind of open the argument out more and reveal more potential ambivalence or uncertainty about things. In other words, they raise more questions than they answer. Okay.
Can I point out something?
Yeah.
In the last paragraph of the article for structural functionalism, excuse me, he points out how he feels that they should fix the ideas of how there's both conservative, kind of more democratic, and then also like there's a mix of so many different ideas. He said that they should be more precise and more specific.
Okay, in other words, they should be more simplified.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I mean. So this says they provide a simplified version. That's what I'm trying to suggest.
Yeah,
is that
exactly.
That's a good, I'm sorry, Shelby, I think I misunderstood you. That was a good
Oh no, yeah. I think
Yeah.
I just couldn't think of my words properly
No, you
while I was
actually
trying to
were-
explain it.
You
So
were more accurate than I was. I'm trying to keep these things very general because let me just kind of explain that, you know, I mean, everybody's getting critiqued here. I'm not making fun, first of all. And I'm not looking down my nose at this stuff and saying, oh, this is shit. What I'm saying is, let's think about this since we're looking at it anonymously. Only you know which of these you wrote and no one else can know that. And that's fine. But let's think objectively about the work of our colleagues and our own work, the way a good social scientist should, the way any good scholar should. Let's look at our work dispassionately and objectively from a distance. And then, like Shelby just did, we begin to connect it to, oh, you know what, in the readings, it does say something different from what I'm saying here. If you don't look at your own work objectively, you're going to miss that. And that's why Shelby's interjection there was really important, was really valuable. Okay, so again, the problem here is that's essentially two paragraphs. I believe those are from the same essay. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure they are. I read two paragraphs and I learn nothing. That's dangerous in a short essay. I mean, it's never good, but if it's an essay of a couple of pages and you've taken two paragraphs and essentially said nothing, what I'm learning from that is this person writing this doesn't understand what he or she just read and may not actually have read it, but may have just kind of overheard what we were talking about in class, maybe made a couple of notes, but not really read the material. Now, I could be wrong, but that's going to be my first go-to because it's common. Do you see though why I have to reread your work several times before I evaluate it? Because I have to try and smooth that in my own mind and think, okay, is this someone who tried to come to grips with the material, or is there just no indication here that they actually read? Then I can go back and check in Moodle and find out who read and who didn't to some extent, imperfectly. Okay. Let's try another one here. There are many different ways to compare the differences. You use the word different twice in a sentence. I'm thinking, again, that makes me think you're vague in your thinking. There are many different ways to compare the differences that can and will. Okay, can and will, again, you're padding. Kyle would call that fluff. Inevitably be found between political systems. You normally don't find something between things. When you find something, it's often something across them or within them. Okay. You know, but I understand differences between. What happens is, because the syntax of this is broken, I lose the very thread, you know, okay, of what I'm trying to say. Okay. I found the readings on structural functionalism as well as rational choice theory to be two incredibly interesting methods of comparing political systems, comma, that each show their own way on how is grammatically completely incorrect. Okay, it doesn't mean anything to do just that in their unique way. Okay, that again, we've got the better part of 2 or more sentences there that essentially say nothing. Okay, I can't evaluate that. Other than to say, I don't think that this writer is confident in her or his understanding of the material. Okay, I just don't see that. Again, there are grammar and syntax errors and things like that, but equally, there is a sense that there's no indication that these materials make sense to this writer, and that concerns me. Okay. Here's a common mistake of undergraduates: never ever refer to an author by his or her first name. Okay, it's a sign of disrespect in a sense. You're not that familiar with these people. Don't do it. Okay, it is disrespect. Some professors in the old days would get absolutely irate. I got in trouble because I was a cavalier little dude when I was in college, and also I was older. I was pushing 30, and I referred to little Karl Marx, and the professor was a Marxist who just about went through the roof, which would have been fine with me because, he was a jerk, but I was being disrespectful, and I was being glib, and I was one of those days. It was not a good day. I was tired, and, it was hot. It was the summertime. I just come in off the ground screw, and I said, little Karl Marx. And then I referred to him, I think, again, as little Karl, and I was sick of Karl Marx, and I was sick of the professor, and I was sick of the class, and it was a stupid Bush League thing to do. It really was. And I later I didn't have to, but I went to the professor and I apologized. And I said, if you want me to apologize in front of the class, I will. That was a stupid thing to do. I don't have an excuse for it, but I can explain why I said what I said. And he was actually pretty cool about it, But more than that, goes on to argue that this alone does not show any major differences between governments, as many different countries are made up of the same institutions. The difference between two political systems can be found in how these institutions function. Remember when I told you, not every example here is bad. That's nails. That's a very good way to, somebody asked me early, and I'm sorry, but I can't remember who. Somebody asked me about using direct quotes with actual quotation marks and stuff. That's how you do it.
Oh, I did. Yeah, and I did that somewhat throughout my paper as well. When I found that it was really helpful, where I just couldn't, my own words weren't what was needed, I would take little snippets. I wouldn't take a full quote.
Okay, but what's important about that is, first of all, it's elegantly written. It's very solid.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, even though the writing's a little clunky, in essence, what Gabriel believes, using structural functionalism, is that while each system may be similar in its institutions, how each institution within a system functions can be vastly different and much better or worse than the institutions found elsewhere. So in other words, you're not just using the quote, you're explaining to me what the quote means. That's what I'm looking for. Now again, I would rewrite that to kind of, clarify it a little bit, but I'm not going to worry about that. It's clear to me that the person writing this understood what they were writing. Okay, understood what they had read and understood how to apply it. This person going forward would recognize structural functionalism if they saw it. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. Okay, it's also important to note that Gabriel believed that it's difficult to assess a comparison between two systems without first acknowledging political socialization, recruitment, and communication. That's right. Those are the elements of structural functionalism. Okay. Now, what I would say there, a couple of little things to try to avoid. This is a disciplinary exercise to try. Try never to use the word it. Just try every time you see the word it. Ask yourself why you want more specific. It's difficult to assess. What is difficult to assess? Okay, that comparison between systems is difficult to assess until we acknowledge or understand political socialization, recruitment, and communication. You see how that's clearer than just saying it's difficult to assess. You're leading in the direction of what's sometimes called passive voice, but it's because you lose precision and clarity. But you see, that's a little editorial improvement that's made to scholarly writing that I edit all the time. I have professors whose work I edit all the time, okay, who don't write any better than this, okay? Some people, writing is not their thing, but this demonstrates what the important moving parts are and why they're important. This student understands this reading, judging by this, okay? So this is one that, even though, yeah, you know, I don't like the Gabriel thing and it's a little kind of funky, but, and again, I would say give your writing another read it out loud. Sometimes that helps, but this is a pretty solid piece of work, as you know, as far as this paragraph goes. Though these two articles and in detail explanation is given through these two articles, and in detail explanation is given to help the readers furthered understanding of methods used in comparing political systems. That sentence is staggeringly meaningless. It just doesn't help. It doesn't demonstrate anything. Okay. And also, you don't say through, you could just say, you know, the two articles provide further understanding of methods used in comparing political systems. But again, so yeah, no kidding. That's why they were assigned. But what does it mean? How are they different? What are the methods? Okay, so try to avoid, you know, again, what, you know, Professor Peterson would call padding. All right? Because it is kind of padding. We don't need it. Strip it away. Send it outside for a beer. It'll be fine. All right? The building blocks for looking at political systems was. That's just you're messing with singular plural. But that can really mess with a reader's mind. The building blocks for looking at political systems was through structural functionalism, and it analyzes structural components, institutions, and how they function within the system altogether. Okay, it reads like a translation. Okay, sometimes my first drafts will read like a translation from another language. Okay, that's a lot of times what happens when you write your first draft. You just want to get the ideas out, and I understand that, but that's a very difficult syntactical nightmare to negotiate on first reading. It's hard to read, and we want to avoid that. Okay. I don't know why people still use terms like building blocks. I don't know what that means. We're not just looking at political systems, we're comparing them. Okay. And structural functionalism, I don't know why that's in quotes. It's an accepted term. You didn't really see structural functionalism in quotes in the readings with any frequency. And there's the evil it, and it analyzes. See, we got building blocks plural. Okay, was singular, it singular. They function. Okay, so it's not effective, and it also, again, reading that, I wouldn't think, oh, this person really understands. Okay. These institutions can include political parties, the three branches of government, interest groups, and more. What sets countries apart that have the same political system is how differently these systems function. Okay, I would take that away because it's not a possessive. That's a commonly misused thing now. It didn't used to be, that has been over the last 8 to 10 years. People misusing the possessive plural, which is this little guy right here, this little, right at the end of systems, right? Don't do that. Don't put that little apostrophe thing there if it's not a possessive. Okay? You're not talking about something possessed by a system. You're talking about systems in the plural. Do you see what I'm talking about? Is everybody looking at that? Okay. Common mistake, it pisses off good writers and interested readers. Okay, but other than that, that's solid. Yeah, it tells me what kind of institutions we're talking about. And it tells me that what's important is not just that the institutions are there, but that we understand how they function. So could it have been more clearly written? A little bit. Does it demonstrate an understanding at a certain level? Yes, it does. Okay. Okay, a test was run in citizen activities when they interacted with their government in 5 different nations. No, that's not what that article says. In other words, it wasn't a controlled experiment where citizen interactions with government were measured in any way. These were questionnaires. We talked about it a little bit in class, but these were questionnaires. People were asked questions about their attitudes. Okay. It had nothing to do with specific observation of interactions with government. It was their attitudes about the system. Okay. And it was presumed that the nations with the strongest democracies would have the most active citizens, but that was not the case. But that was not the case, I guess. When you use a comma in the middle of a sentence, it's generally, the convention now is, if you're joining together 2 short independent clauses, that is, each of these could stand alone as a sentence, but you want the reader to link them together more explicitly and they're not long and cumbersome, then you use a comma. Otherwise, you don't need a comma. In this case, you actually needed a comma or a period. But since it's the second one is so short, but it's an independent clause, it could grammatically stand alone as a sentence, then you say, I'm going to leave it in there. Okay. Okay. But it was assumed, you get that kind of stuff, right? It was presumed by whom? Structural functionalism as a theory, right? I mean, that structural functionalists assumed that nations with the strongest democracies would have the most active citizens. But you don't tell me how they're measuring strong democracy. So this sentence doesn't work. It doesn't give me the information I need to understand your point. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay, this next one it's in a different font. On structural functionalism, okay, that is the title of an article. Please put it in quotes. Okay, if it's the title of the book, italicize or underline it. If it is the title of an article, put it in quotes. Same thing with rational choice theory. Are both essays that explore different methods of comparing political systems? Yes and no, but London exhibits a stance on structural functionalism. What does it mean to exhibit a stance? It sounds very physical and somewhat painful.
I guess they take a position.
Then why don't they take a position?
Exhibits a stance sounds fancier, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds fancy, but it also sounds silly because they don't exhibit anything. They don't put anything on display. Okay. In other words, you could take out London exhibits a stance on structural functionalism. According to London, structural functionalism focuses on institutions and their functions. Well, Scott's rational choice theory, while Scott focuses on rational choice theory, the economic decision-making of individuals within the system. Okay, tell me why it's different. You're almost there. Clearly, there's an understanding that there's a difference there, but it's imperfect. Okay, don't try to write fancy. Try to write clearly. Okay, don't try to impress me, and if you own, get rid of a thesaurus and don't ever use one. If the word's not in your head, don't use it. But also, don't try to be fancy. Don't exhibit a stance when you can merely say something, or maybe argue something, or reason, or something like that. But don't exhibit a stance. It doesn't work, and it distracts the reader, okay? Political systems have shaped the way governments or states, I don't know why those are in quotes, governments or states make decisions and are affected by the culture of societies. Some political systems are built around structure to function. I don't know what structure to function means. Built around structure to function. This includes citizens who are affected. Well, citizens are not systems. So this includes, what does? The political system includes this? Structure to function, whatever that is, does that include it? Citizens who are affected by such political decisions and have the ability to influence change. No, not in every system. You can use these theories to analyze dictatorial systems as well. All right? Two political systems that focus on structure are structural functionalism and civic culture. Structural functionalism is the theory informing civic culture. Neither of those is a political system. Those are methods. Okay? So that doesn't work. That's not factually correct. Okay? These political systems have coordinated sets of laws, ideas, and principles which affect who is in power and the responsiveness of the concerns of the people. No, they don't. No, they don't, because they're not political systems. So that's just simply not factually accurate. Okay? All right. That's pretty much all I had there. I didn't want to go too far into that, but I thought it was important that we take a look at that. All right. Are there questions about anything in terms of writing, in terms of me trying to explain, here's what works, here's what doesn't? Be clear in your writing, but always be informed by the thing about which you are writing. Don't just put words on paper, virtually or otherwise, okay? Because that's not going to help us. Okay? If anybody's interested, Derek Chauvin was just convicted on all 3 counts in the George Floyd case. So I don't know if you're interested in that. I'm gonna just leave that where it is, but I was concerned about it. Some of you may be. It's awkward for me to be teaching right now when I should be paying attention to that, but I'm paying attention to you right now because you are important as well. All right. That's what I'm looking for, though, when I evaluate your work. So if you're wondering, well, when Bill looks at my work, what's he looking for? And how is he looking at it? That's why I wanted to do this, so you could see, okay, this is how he looks at my work, and this is how he evaluates it. And so these are the things I need to think about. Make sure I'm actually saying what I mean to say. Say it concisely. Don't use 10 words if 2 will do, okay? Don't try to be fancy. Don't try to be stylish. Just say it. Don't use direct quotes, because that doesn't indicate to me that you understand the content of the direct quote. Where you do use a direct quote, I think Shelby suggested this, use a brief excerpt and then explain to me that you know what it means and why it's important. And if you recall the one example we looked at that had quotes in it like that, it worked beautifully. It was clear that that student understood. This is why, hey, Bill, this is why I want the reader to see this quote, because it means this, and that has to do with why I'm writing this assignment and what I think is germane to comparing political systems. Any other questions about your essays? Obviously, I have not completed the grading yet. In fact, to be honest with you, because I have a super busy week, I may not finish the grading until Friday. It may be that long. If you're concerned about your grade and want to know how you did, though, I can push yours kind of to the front of the queue and at least give you a preliminary grade. I can say, well, I looked at your work. It's somewhere between a B and a B plus, or somewhere in there. If you're concerned, just email me. I'll stop what I'm doing. I'll take 20 minutes, give yours another reading. I've already read them twice. Some of them I need to read one more time, and then I'll start grading. But I've also got other, I've got other assignments to evaluate and things like that. So that's up to you. If you could just shoot me an email if you'd like me at least to give you an idea of, hey, should I think about doing a rewrite, or is mine okay? That would be fine. All right. Any other questions about the assignment? Were the guidelines for the assignment sufficient and clear, or do you need more information or guidance? Or do you just not care?
I have kind of a separate question.
Okay, but I want to get to this one first.
Yeah.
Yeah. In other words, when you looked at the prompt for the assignment, was it more or less clear, given what we had talked about in class and what you had read, was it more or less clear what I was asking of you? Summarize any two assigned readings, explaining what they can teach us about the methods of comparing political systems. Be sure to cite each whenever used to illustrate your points. And then I just say it's two. So in other words, I want to keep it specific, but I want to keep it broad enough so that there's more than one way to do this. Okay. Now, Kyle, what was your concern?
Kind of like a more of like a separate thing, but like, is it possible not to have two thesis statements, I guess, but like if we're approaching two articles, right? Is it possible to do like a less grouped analysis, as in you analyze?
Because it's a single essay. Well, is it possible? Yes. Am I going to grade it well? No. Because the whole point is show me how these things work together.
Mhm.
The thing that demonstrates learning is not just regurgitation, however elegantly written. It's the idea of making connections. Human beings are distinguished from everything else on the planet, including computers, by our extraordinary ability to recognize patterns. Okay? Sometimes we're so good at it that we see patterns where patterns really don't exist. Okay? But the test of the human intellect, the fundamental test of human intelligence, is recognizing how things fit together. And as a consequence of that recognition, achieving better understanding of something. So the reason why I want you to explain these is I want you to try to put them together. Now, a couple of people just started at the top and summarized one article and then summarized the other one. The problem with that is there's no thesis. Now, Kyle, with respect to the case you're pointing out, if in a thesis statement you point out, with respect to structural functionalism, we'll briefly discuss the importance of analyzing not merely the structure of an institution, but how it functions by way of making sense of and comparing systems. With respect to rational choice, we're going to talk about a contrasting point of view where we emphasize methodological individualism and individual level decision making. Okay, then you could go and say, okay, first I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that.
You'd
But
have
you
to
still have a thesis that demonstrates to me that you can kind of connect them both together.
So you basically have to have like a solid introduction that introduces both of them.
Yeah.
Then maybe the individual, then a conclusion that you have to be very careful on the introduction and conclusion to tie them both together.
You have to be complete. The introduction should be the last thing you write. Once you've completed your essay and you're more or less happy with it, you're probably going to want to go back up and make sure that introduction really explains to me what you're going to do in the body of your paper. Okay. Because if you can do that, if you can structure your thinking, it means you've had to think through it again. And you've had to try to analyze, do I really understand this stuff? Am I really making sense of this? Okay. So it's not just because I'm being, particularistic or anything. It's because it is useful for you to do that. All right. Anything else on the assignment? Okay. Now, it is possible that when I evaluate your assignment, you will see something in there that says, before I can assign you a grade on this, I want to meet with you individually, and I want to talk about this. Okay. The responsibility is yours to get back to me, to let me know your availability so we can set up a time to do that. If you don't do that, you probably aren't going to be happy with the grade I give you, because that's going to mean there are some structural issues here. There are some issues of fact as opposed to distortion or mistake here that I can't make sense of. We need to talk about how you can do better. It probably means I'm offering you a chance to rewrite it. If you don't take advantage of that, though, I'm not going to wait very long. Then I'm going to go ahead and just assign whatever grade I can. If you've attempted an assignment in good faith, that is, you've actually tried the assignment, I'm not going to give you an F, but it is possible to get a D. It's rare, but it's possible. Okay. All right, then why don't we move on? If there are no other questions, then we'll move on to module 2. And what we need to do here is to decide, this is going to be the first module where you all have the opportunity to do some presenting in class starting next week. Okay. Now remember, for the module in which you present, okay, excuse me, I'm sorry, you don't write you don't write during that module. You don't have to. You can if you want to maybe you felt like you did crummy on module 1. If you want to present in module 2 and also write the paper, I can consider that as extra credit. I mean, I can, at least it shows me effort. You're trying to, fix what wasn't right first time along. That's fine. But normally in a module where you present, I want your presentation to be good enough that I don't want you to worry about writing. It's also an incentive to present, okay? So we have 3 readings here. The first is this alternative theories of the state. Now, I only want one person to present on this because it's a book review. It's very brief. I want to say it's 3 pages, but it's 4 pages. Actually, I think it is really 3 pages. So it's only 3 or 4 pages. There's not a lot there. One person can make sense of that. Is there anybody who wants to do that? Remember, if you present for module, in this case for module 2, you don't have to write a paper. All right, I'm going to come back to that one. Theta Scotchbowl, bringing the state back in. This module is really about this notion of theories of the state. Well, if we had structural functionalism and we had rational choice, why are we fooling around with state theory? Well, Scotchbowl's trying to explain that, and so is the article on why the state was sort of dropped as a methodological point in the first place. All right. So there's the Scotchbowl article. I want 2 people on that.
I'll do the bring back the state, or actually I'll do
Well, there's
yeah.
2. The Scotchbowl article?
The original one, the 2007 John Skite Pike lecture.
Oh, all right. So the one of why the state was dropped?
Yeah, or wait, am
Right? Okay.
I reading the wrong thing? Wait.
Why was the state dropped in the first place?
I was thinking doing the other one.
That's Theta Scotchbowl.
I'm just reading I'm reading the wrong name. Yeah. I'll do that one. Yeah. I'll do the Scotchbowl one. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let me take you out of that one.
I'll do the alternative theories one, the book review.
Who's that? Okay. Okay. All right. Why was the state dropped? This is an essay that argues that with the United States sort of leading the way in comparative politics during this period of time, theories of the state were often associated with communism and socialism. And so the argument here is that for largely political reasons, scholars were encouraged to move away from that theory. That one's going to take 2 or 3 people because it's a long article. Although it can, if you look at it, it can be summarized pretty easily. It's pretty clearly written as these things go. There are not a lot of numbers in it or anything. That's one of the reasons why it's as long as it is. So nobody wants to do that. You understand what you're suggesting by not wanting to present. What you're really saying is, I don't really have any intention of reading that. That's 50 pages of my life you're not going to get. Which is going to be encouraging to me to think about how exactly to frame assignment number 2. Because
I can do that one.
All right. Okay. That's a lot for one person to do. Is there anybody who wants to give Kate a hand on that?
I can try to.
Okay. Shelby, all right. And the advantage there is, if it has to be an incentive, you don't have to write for the next 2 weeks in this class. Okay. Now, and keep in mind too, that in other classes, I have people required to keep written notes on these things. It's a way that I verify that people are actually reading. I'm not even asking that of you. So the actual writing assignments in here are intentionally fairly light, because my thinking is these ideas are new to you, and they're so new to you that we need the time just to think about them and discuss them in class, okay? So let me just very briefly, before I let you go, explain what this whole notion of state theory is all about, okay? The idea of the state is something that historically is much more common to systems other than the American system. Okay. Typically, when Americans think of states, they think of the individual 50 states. They think of the state of California, obviously, because it's the best, or perhaps the state of Oregon, or one of these other lesser pathetic states. You know, there are another 48 of them. And that's it. So when people say the state, to a lot of Americans, it doesn't make sense. There's a reason for that, because even in universities, theories of the state were not common for much of American history, even though they were in European systems. There was much more of a sense, first of all, of the existence of the state and the critical importance of the state. But part of the problem with state theory is trying to figure out, well, what is the state? What does that mean? You know, in other words, the state properly understood isn't the government. In state theory, the government is the people who inhabit the state, you know, the institutions of power. That's just the government. That's why you'll hear, like, when Britain has an election, whatever, they sort of fumble around and get around to it. They talk about a change in government. They're obviously not changing the architecture of the system. They're changing, in this case, usually which party controls that architecture, okay, as a consequence of how an election turns out, parliamentary election. When we talk about a change in government, part of the thing is we don't have a system, a parliamentary system where, for example, people just vote on their member of parliament and then that's it. Okay, we have separate elections for the House of Representatives, the United States Senate, the presidency, as well as state offices and even local offices. Okay, so we have a lot of elected offices and a lot of elections in this country, right? We don't do a lot of that deciding, but it's decentralized so that you could have, and America has had, say, a Republican in the White House, Democrats controlling the Senate, and Republicans controlling the House, or something like that. You know, that's sometimes called divided government. Okay, that's not going to happen in a parliamentary system. There could be a coalition government, which is a mixed system where, say, two parties have to combine, maybe even three, in order to achieve a governing majority. Okay, we don't have that. There's no governing majority in that sense in the United States. If Democrats control the House, they control the House. They control the rules because they control the Rules Committee. They control the various committees because they control the committees. They have the committee chairs. Okay, same thing with the Senate. But the Democrats could control the House but not control the Senate. They could control the House and the Senate but not control the White House. We've seen all those things. Okay, and so our theories of government are kind of cloudy because of that. And it's one of the reasons people argue Americans haven't generated a lot of important state theory. It's generally been non-Americans. It's been Europeans. It's been the Brits and Europeans. Okay. So the first notion we have to get at is what the state is. And it's generally looked at as that kind of nexus of institutions that fit together to exercise decision-making authority over a polity. Okay. They determine the outcomes of politics. They're not the only ones involved in the process, but they adjudicate the disputes, they pass the law, they disseminate the law, they enforce the law, and they adjudicate violations of the law. That's the state. Citizens cannot do those things. They cannot. They're not allowed. Okay. Even with a jury, the jury doesn't make law, and the jury doesn't interpret law. The jury has law explained to them the way a judge interprets it. Okay. The judge is part of the state. Okay. The jury is not. The jury is not permanent. The judge is. The police are. Legislature is. They're permanent institutions. But the people who inhabit that, they circulate. The district attorney's office is a permanent part of the state. The district attorney is typically an elected official who inhabits that office. So state theory, first of all, is asking us, to understand the difference between someone who is president and the office of the presidency as part of the state. Okay. Sometimes we'll find someone who's in a position of power or someone advising that person who begins to think of themselves as the state. It's that classic, l'état c'est moi, I am the state. No, you're not. Not according to state theory. No, you're not. State theory discusses a lot of bureaucratic institutional decision-making, a lot of procedural norms and standard operating procedures. So the theory of organizations and bureaucratic theory are part of state theory in this sense. They explain, well, how are decisions made within the state? And some people say, well, it's the way those particular institutions operate their decision-making, as part of the state. And it isn't because, well, it's a democracy. That doesn't matter. The state may be inhabited as a result of democratic processes, but that's not the same thing as saying that the state is democratic, okay? I can't stop the police from arresting me by expressing my point of view and voting no, I should not be arrested, okay? Either can 50 people in my neighborhood stop one police officer legally from arresting me. That's not democracy. It's not supposed to be. It's a standard operating bureaucratic process built and imposed by the state. In addition to that, there's the notion, and this is coming up in the philosophy seminar I'm teaching on violence. There is a state theory of violence, okay? The idea that violence is part of the architecture of the modern state. Max Weber, great German sociologist, very influenced by Machiavelli, among others, argued persuasively that one of the fundamental defining features of the state is the monopoly of coercive violence. Okay, citizens must not have, cannot have a monopoly of coercive violence. Otherwise, the state is too weak to enforce the law. If we can outgun the state, it can't enforce law. In that sense, there is no state. It just ceases to function. This is why revolutions occur, because the state is too weak. Okay, the institutions of the state, or the legitimacy of those institutions, which is an important component of their strength, has withered away to the point where they can't enforce law. State ceases to function, state gets overthrown, new state is imposed, whatever, okay? The violent transition that we think about from, say, Weimar Germany to Nazi Germany, there was a lot of violence associated with it, but a lot of that was legislative due process that was then corrupted, but it was a seizure of the state, of the authority to govern, and the mechanisms of enforcing that authority. Okay, so state theory is really important, and Skocpol is one who has been, she was in the 80s in particular, prominent in that notion of particularly convincing American intellectuals, come on, we've got to reconsider the state in ways that you've just been avoiding with your group theories and rational choice individualism and all that. That doesn't explain the state. The state explains the state. It also takes us in the direction of what are called state-society relations. As a couple of you noticed in your papers, structural functionalism is telling us not just what is the institutional architecture, but how does it function, okay? It's the same thing with state-society relations. And the idea there is the way that you evaluate the strength of the state is its ability to achieve desired outcomes, okay? And if the citizens can stop a state from doing something, that's a relatively weak state, okay? Now, if you think about that, that would mean that the weakest states structurally would be democratic states because they give citizens the most power, okay? And there is a type of state theory that says, yes, that's right, that states in democratic systems are weaker than our states in authoritarian systems or totalitarian systems, okay? That the less democratic you are, the more you're relying on the strength and efficiency of the state, okay? So it's another way of thinking about democracy. And then we start asking ourselves, well, is a weak state a good thing then? Or is democracy a bad thing? Okay, you see how it gets us thinking about comparing in a very different way. So there are a lot of reasons to bring the state back in. And that's what we'll be talking about in our presentations next week. And, we'll do the best we can. It's the first time we've done presentations. I would say one of the reasons why I don't want you to write if you're presenting, especially if it's a longer piece, just focus on that one piece. We'll discuss the other stuff in class, but particularly with that notion of why the state was dropped in the first place, that's a long piece. It's descriptive and it's discursive and it's conversational, so it naturally is going to look longer than it really needs to be. But it's a theory we got to think about, and Sconspol's notion of bringing the state back in. Remember, don't summarize the article. Start by explaining to me, okay, Bill, if there are two things you're going to learn from this article that the author really thinks are important, they are this and this. Then you can start talking to me a bit more about the larger content of the article, okay? But you've got to demonstrate to me, and most importantly to your colleagues in class who need your help in unlocking these readings, these are the big things you got to think about. You know how I know? Because this is all I read for a week, you know, in this class. I wasn't distracted by anything else. And I spent a lot of time with this. And maybe I emailed Hughes to ask him, hey, if I said this and this and this, would that be accurate? Okay? Any questions about what I'm asking you to do?
Are we presenting the bigger piece on next Thursday? Or
We're
no,
going to try to present all of
Thursday,
them.
next Tuesday, excuse me. Never
Next
mind.
Tuesday.
Brain-
We're going
brain.
to try to present all three of them if we have time. But if we feel ourselves running out of gas, you know, it's our class. We can do whatever we want with it, right? I mean, I'm not worried about, nobody from the administration is going to come and knock on my front door and say, Bill, you got to get these people caught up. And if they did, you know, I would throw that keyboard at them. You know, this is my house, you know, Castle Doctrine, baby. Forget about it. You know, I have a sign right there. It says in online meeting, you know. So I'm in an online meeting.
That means they can't legally enter your room, right? You
That's
just put
right.
the in online meeting right there. It's
Yeah, you're right. That's right. And if they did, I have the right to thrill them, you know. I'll just bring my skeleton out and scare them. All right. Anything else? All right. And as I say, I'm going to do my best to get the papers graded as soon as I can, but I'm just, the way things are shaking, I got a bunch of meetings this week and those always kind of take it out of me. And I don't want to grade your papers when I'm feeling real tired or pissed off or something from a meeting. I'd rather be in a really good mood, but I should be able to have those done by Friday. Okay. Any other questions? All right, then I'll see you next week.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.